Hey everybody, Tony D with another hot take. I gotta make this short because I got 4th of July waiting for me. Speaking of 4th of July, Trump's speech last night, pretty spectacular. If I had to review it, I would say this is probably his top speech. From a pure delivery standpoint, I don't think he made a single mistake. I mean, he really didn't. He was energized. He didn't pause weird or say anything weird. I mean, he was crystal clear in his wording, and it was a speech you absolutely could not refute. It was very pro-American, but it wasn't like overly pro-American like Bush would be. Bush would sometimes go too far, and you know, in the context that he was bombing half the Middle East, praising the military relentlessly. Like Trump can, he has better credibility praising the military in that way because he's not using it to strafe every country with brown people in it. He's actually trying to bring the troops home. So his American exceptionalism, or whatever you want to call it, his patriotism, is, it resonates. It doesn't resonate when you're getting people killed and you're trying to have, this is Bush. If you're trying to have a 4th of July celebration or Boy Scouts Jamboree or whatever you have, and people are dying, like having him stand up at a podium and laugh, it doesn't resonate. Trump, first off, he's not laughing necessarily. He's not unhappy. And he always seems to be trying to get stuff done, and always talking about what he's getting done or what he's about to get done. The speech was, as some people put it on Twitter, a line in the sand against the Marxist and communist and socialist of Antifa, which by themselves, they're not much of a threat, but Trump's allowed them to, well, I shouldn't say that. It's not his responsibility to police every city and state from a federal level. Like, he's doing his job, which he supports the governors and mayors. Well, really, it's the governors. And then the governors are supposed to support the mayors, and they're supposed to keep the city safe. And they could have. It's obvious to most people they could have kept these protests, from becoming riots if they had deployed the police correctly and done what they needed to do. If they had called the National Guard in, which, Trump was ready to do that, right? He was standing on the sidelines going, I'll send the National Guard whenever you want. This will be over in a day. You kind of can't argue with that. So his line in the sand now is the statues. He's deploying some kind of special task force. Thanks, Antifa. I don't know what this is going to cost us. But, and my prediction is the Antifa guys will probably find a statue somewhere that no one's guarding and go after that. But for the big stuff, I don't think they're going to go after it. I think they'll be rebuffed. Maybe they could try their ploy of attacking, kind of, and hoping that there's an over-response, but there just hasn't been. That goes to the training of some of these cops and some of these police forces. There hasn't been an over-response. There was an over-response back in the day for hippie protesters. They were protesting the Vietnam War. They were generally peaceful, but the cops didn't like them, and the cops were more corrupt and out of control back then. They were more like a gang that worked for the city, and they beat up a lot of different. That was their sort of calling card. That's old school policing. You find the criminals and then you beat them up a bit, so you remind them, hey, not my town, buddy. Not that I endorse that, but that's something that was very pervasive. Now, it's too hard to do that. It still happens. It still happens in its own way. But, cops have to worry about video cameras. And they get caught doing that, bad things happen to them. Now, not as bad as maybe it should, but it's a lot more difficult to do that kind of stuff. So, Trump drawing this line in the sand, who's going to argue with this? Who's going to argue for Marxism and socialism and communism. Biden has an impossible position to take now. If he takes the opposite view of Trump from this Mount Rushmore speech, then he's got to say, "Oh, everything's terrible," and the socialists and Marxists, well, they have a point. Tearing down statues. Well, maybe we should listen to these people. I mean, it's an impossible position to defend. So the only thing he can do is say, well, things aren't going that great, and I would certainly be doing things differently, and it's all going to be good if you elect me. I mean, that's about all he can say, assuming he can even get those words out. I mean, Trump was, really just, in terms of his speaking, just really on point. Biden I haven't seen that from Biden in I don't know how long. Even going all the way back into the early debates. I mean, he was just a mushmouth. He was making mistakes and gaffes and correcting himself and saying, oh, wait, maybe I should start over. You just can't do that after a while. It's one thing to make a mistake, one mistake. It's another thing to make a couple of mistakes here and there. If you correct yourself immediately, okay, but Biden sometimes doesn't do that. He says something outrageous and just keeps going because he's either not listening to what he's saying, or it just doesn't register in his brain that he said something stupid. 120 million people died of the beer virus. No. And to say the word million in that sentence, I mean, that's like a word you don't miss usually, even when you're not listening to yourself. Well, 120 million people died. That word usually resonates in your brain. It's not a casual thing that 120 million people died. So, the fact that he's so, routine about it tells you where his brain is. Like, oh, 120,000 people, 120 million people. What's the difference? There's a big difference. I don't think he's a very caring person, and all over the internet, they've shown Biden's 88 gaffes, and he ran for president in 88. And I was, he was on my short list of guys to vote for back then. But man, they caught him plagiarizing speeches. And this is in the 80s. This is before the internet. They caught him plagiarizing speeches. Not one speech, but multiple speeches until, the first time he said it was no big deal. And then eventually he had to apologize for it. So it's bad. And Biden lied too. They caught him lying about his record as a college student, saying that he was at the top of his class and held 3 degrees, and he only holds 1. I don't know why you would lie about that to a crowd of people to make yourself seem smarter. But, old school politicians back in the day could say whatever you want to a crowd. Who was going to know? Then you'd go somewhere else and nobody would record it. And this was in the late 80s, so by then people were starting to record things. But prior to that, if you're talking like prior to the 60s, if somebody was going to show up with TV cameras or video cameras, it was kind of a big deal. It was big, bulky equipment. A lot of times you were outside giving a speech. People could take notes and you could just deny it. Or you could just say, well, he misquoted me or whatever. And more often than not, we now know that a lot of reporters were sympathetic to certain candidates, so it wasn't a big deal anyway. Imagine the way it was like in the 1800s. You could say anything. I promise to give everybody $10,000 in gold. You'll all get it. Vote for me. I mean, why not? If that's what gets you the votes in some small town, who's gonna know you said it? Okay, yeah, maybe a reporter on the scene writes something down, but you could just say, "Oh, that's an exaggeration. Why would I say that?" You could even say to the people before you leave, now I might have to deny that I'm going to give you that money, but don't worry. I mean, you could just make up elaborate lies back then. These days you just can't. There's too many video cameras. You have to be consistent in your rhetoric, and Biden's just not. And Trump is taking a path that you can't argue with. Okay, you can't, unless you're like a rabid Marxist, socialist, communist. You can't. You have to agree with Trump. Is tearing down the statues a good thing? Very few people are going to go, absolutely. It was one thing to tear down the Confederates, but when you tear down, most people will be, who cares? But when you start tearing down the statues of the founding fathers, no. Stop it. It's bad. We're not going to erase history. We're going to put back all those statues, and any damage you've done is going to be repaired. Because Trump doesn't have a problem repairing all those statues. He'll repair the damn Confederate ones, he's already said. And these governors will bow down before him because he'll cut off their federal money. And now, most of these Democrats, because they don't understand economics, you can strangle them. Because they don't understand economics and they need federal money. They spend too much money. They don't understand. If you spend the right amount of money, you have a certain level of independence if you balance your budgets. These guys don't understand it. Oh, and one more thing. I just have to say again, the governor of South Dakota is an absolute stone cold fox. I had no idea. I'd never seen her before. But man, is she a knockout. I was just blown away when she got up on the podium. I'm like, who is this? And she's like a smart Sarah Palin. Like Sarah Palin was kind of like, but she's like an elk hunter or something. Wow. And she had the Michelle Obama arms going. It was a very toned, beautiful woman. She is definitely going to be on the short list for VP pick, Mike Pence, if she doesn't run away with it. Because I'll tell you this, I now understand why women voted for John F. Kennedy.